Good day, sir and everyone. I'm Vivian Lay B. Despi of BSE 3C. In today's video, we will present to you our report video presentation in ECC 321, International Business and Trade. Since we are Group 5, we are tasked to prepare a video presentation about a multilateral regulation of trade and investment. The members of our group consist of 3 persons, which is me, Niña May Ortega, and Ruby Dadibas. So I am going to discuss the chapter 6.1, which is about the basic principles of multilateral trade negotiations. So first, GATT. GATT was an international institution set up in 1947 to encourage multilateral trade. So the GATT will always be remembered for conferring upon the world trading system a multilateral character, as also for making world trade more restriction-free. The WTO has stepped into the same shoes with more vibrant measures. It will thus be worthwhile to explain what actually formed the basis for multilateral trade negotiations during the past 5 decades. So, according to Hochman and Kostiki in 1995, there are 4 principles of multilateral trading system. First is the non-discrimination, second, reciprocity, and the third one is the market access, and fourth, fair competition. First of all, the principle of non-discrimination, which is referred to in the very preamble of the GATT, is implied in 2 key provisions. They are Article 1 and Article 3. So Article 1, adopting the principle of most favored nations treatment, or MFNT, and Article 3, adopting the principle of national treatment. So, in the most favored nations, any tariff reduction will be applicable equally to all member countries, irrespective of economic status of a member country. So, MFNT requires that any tariff reduction negotiated between 2 member countries will be extended immediately and unconditionally to all member countries. This means that MFNT provides for equal and not any special treatment irrespective of the economic status of a member country. However, there are a few bilateral features that have continued to exist. For example, trade concessions negotiated between the United States of America and Canada remained bilateral. A few safeguard clauses also continue to remain bilateral. For example, any country facing a balance of payments problem could impose restriction on import from a specific country. So the second principle is the principle of reciprocity. It is based on quid pro quo, that is, any concessions given by one country has to be matched by the other. So, the principle of reciprocity implies quid pro quo. Any reduction in the level of protection of one member country has to be matched by an equivalent reduction in the level of protections given to the other country. So the reciprocity criteria may be interpreted in 2 ways. So, one involves the exchange of similar concessions, that is, tariff concessions against tariff concessions. The other provide for the exchange of dissimilar concessions, such as tariff concessions as against removal of quota. So the third is the concept of market access is based on an open trading system where competition prevails among suppliers located in different countries. So a country cannot raise tariff beyond the bound level for limiting access to its markets. If it does, it will have to compensate the affected parties. So the fourth one is the fair competition. So the competition should be fair and it should not harm the trading partner. The WTO maintains transparency in its own dealings and likes its members to maintain transparency in their trade policies and procedures. So dumping refers to selling goods abroad at a price lower than the domestic price. This is why the GATT rules have provided for imposing anti-dumping duty in order to encounter any move for unwarranted dumping. The importing governments may intervene the imports are injurious to domestic industries or to the balance of payment of the country. So the chapter 6.2 is about the GATT and its early round. So, the process of the evolution of GATT was not very smooth. In fact, the pursuance of a bigger than neighbor policy, including competitive devaluation, tariff impositions, and discriminatory trade barriers resulting in shrinkage in world trade during 1930s and early 1940s lead resolutions during the Bretton Woods Conference in 1944 to create the International Trade Organizations or ITO. The first discussion and then proposed ITO was held at the 1946 United Nations Conference on Trade and Employment. A preparatory committee was formed, which had various meetings, and the final charter was agreed upon at Havana. But in the wake of the refusal of the United States Congress to ratify the charter, the GATT is designed as a multilateral treaty to regulate the world trade. Came into being as an interim arrangement in Table 6.1. So we can see here at the Table 6.1 the GATT round. So the beginning from 1947, GATT endeavored its best to promote multilateral trading system for almost 5 decades. So the first round at the Geneva in 1947 led to the creation of the General Agreement and to some 45,000 tariff concessions covering around one-half of world trade. The following two rounds, one at Annecy in France in 1949 and the other at Turkey and UK in 1951, were largely concerned with accessions negotiations, and tariff reductions was only modest. The Geneva Round of 1951 to 56, the members had to reach 33. During this round, the negotiations for tariff reductions were modest compared to this in the first round. The Dillon Round of 1960 to 61, tariff adjustments were made following the creation of the European Common Market, and some tariff reduction negotiations were held. So, however, the tariff cut negotiated at the Kennedy Round at 1962 to 67 was sizable. An across-the-board formula was adopted for tariff-reduced products. For the tariff reduction on industrial products, resulting in a tariff of 35% on such products. In Tokyo Round in 1973 to 79, 99 countries participated, representing around 90% of the world trade. The negotiations spurred 33,000 tariff lines, with the results that the average import-weighted tariff on the manufactured goods dropped to around 6%. So, the Uruguay Round in 1986 to 94, or the 8th round, was of a great significance, especially in view of its coverage. So, the first is the unfinished agenda of the Tokyo Round had to be completed. They are primarily A. Reforms in the safeguard measures, B. Reforms in agriculture, and the two is beside including the traditional tariff easing measures that brought down the average level of tariff 3.9% by the middle of 1990s compared to about 40% during late 1940s. Constitution of Trade Policy Review Mechanism or TPRM, and the fourth one is some new aspects related to international trade. And the fifth one is the reimbursement of a dispute settlement system, and the sixth one, is the GATT was conferred with a legal status through the creation of WTO. A plurilateral agreement are agreements binding only on signatories or opposed to multilateral agreements that are binding on all members. The Uruguay Round agreements is in the multilateral. So, consist in the multilateral is the agriculture, sanitary and phytosanitary measures, textiles and clothing, technical barriers to trade, trims and anti-dumping practices, customs valuation and pre-shipment inspections, rules of origins, import licensing procedures, subsidies and countervailing measures, safeguard, GATS, TRIPS, dispute settlements, and trade policy review mechanisms or TPRM. So the plurilateral is the public procurement, trade and civil aircraft, international dairy products, and international bovine meat.
Is the World Trade Organizations. So let us know first what is the World Trade Organizations. So the World Trade Organization, this is an international organization wherein that helps countries trade with each other by setting rules for international trade and providing a forum for negotiations and dispute resolutions. So its main goal is to promote and facilitate free trade between countries while ensuring the fairness and transparency in the process. It also provides technical assistance and training for developing countries to help them participate more effectively in global economy. Uh, like for example, think of a big club where countries can come together and make an agreements about how they were going to buy and sell goods and services with each other. The World Trade Organization was established in 1995, replacing the GATT as a primary organization responsible for regulating the international trade. While the two organizations share a common goal, there are several differences between them. One of the key differences is that while the GATT allowed the continuation of some side agreements, the World Trade Organization administered a unified package of agreements that all members are committed to. This means that all members countries are bound by the same set of rules and regulation, ensuring a all level playing field for all countries. And the second one is the World Trade Organization scope is also a broader than the GATT. So it covers trade in services, intellectual property, and the other areas that were not included in GATT. Additionally, the World Trade Organization has made environmental issues a priority for the first time, recognizing that trade and environment are closely linked. So another difference between the two organizations is the improved version of the original GATT rules in relation to the trade in goods. The World Trade Organization has more effective rules for trade and goods, making it more robust institution rather. Next is the textile and clothing, as well as agriculture were outside the purview of GATT, but they are now covered by the World Trade Organizations. This means that the World Trade Organization has a wider scope than the GATT. The World Trade Organization member is also more extensive than the GATT. The World Trade Organization has 153 members in July 2008, while the GATT membership was much smaller. And finally, the World Trade Organization has a more effective dispute settlement mechanism than GATT. Members cannot block decisions made under the dispute settlement mechanism, and disputes have to be settled within a fixed time framework. So in summary of that, while the World Trade Organizations and the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade share a common goal, the World Trade Organization has a broader scope, a more extensive membership, and more effective rules for the trades and goods, dispute settlement, and environmental issues. That the Minister Conference is indeed the highest decision-making body in the World Trade Organizations, composed of one representative from each member country. It convenes every 2 years to approve the major policy changes and provide a guidance on directions of the organization's work. Below the Ministerial Conference is the General Council, which is responsible for overseeing the day-to-day operations of the World Trade Organizations. It acts as a dispute settlement body, administer the trade policy review mechanism, and supervises the trade in goods, services, and intellectual property rights. The General Council also makes recommendations to the Ministerial Conference on issue that requires its attention. The General Council delegates responsibilities to 3 subordinate council and several committees. or committees which manage specific areas of multilateral trade agreements. This includes the Council of Trade in Goods, the Council for Trades in Services, the Council for TRIPS or trade-related aspect of intellectual property rights, and several committees including the Committees on Agriculture and Committee on Trade and Development. The Director General is the head of the World Trade Organization Secretariat, which looks after the collective interest of the member countries. The Secretariat provides a technical support for the various World Trade Organization bodies and carries out the day-to-day work of the organization. In the World Trade Organization, the decision-making process, consensus is the preferred method for arriving at decisions. However, if the consensus cannot be reached, a two-thirds or the three-fourths majority vote may be used. There is no weighted voting and each member has only one vote. The function of the World Trade Organizations. So number one, the World Trade Organization provides a forum for further negotiations for trade liberalizations in the framework of the various agreements. It means that the World Trade Organization serves as a platform for countries to continue negotiating and making agreements to further liberalize or to increase the trade between the countries. The World Trade Organization also established a various agreements that outlines the rules and regulations for international trade. And with this framework, the countries can discuss and negotiate further measures to reduce barriers to trade, such as tariffs or taxes on imports and other trade restrictions. The World Trade Organization provide a space for countries to come together and have these discussions in a structured and organized way with the goal of promoting more open and fair trade relation between the nations. Number two, the World Trade Organizations administer the new dispute settlement procedure. It means that the World Trade Organization has established a dispute settlement procedure to help the members countries resolve trade disputes that may arise between them. These procedures provide a formal and transparent process for countries to bring complaints against each other and have them resolved by a neutral third party. The World Trade Organization administers this procedure, which includes a series of steps such as consultation, adjudication, and enforcement of decisions. The aim of dispute settlement procedure is to ensure that the trade disputes are resolved fairly and efficiently and that countries abide by the rules and regulations of the World Trade Agreements. By providing this mechanism of resolving disputes, the World Trade Organization helps to promote stability and predictability. 3. Establishes a direct trade policy review mechanism as to examine trade policies and practices of the member countries and to suggest measure of reform. Meaning that the World Trade Organization has established a trade policy review mechanism to review the trade policies and practices of its members countries. This mechanism aims to provide a comprehensive and regular assessment of the trade policy of each member country with a goal of promoting transparency and openness in international trade. Under this mechanism, each member country is subject to periodic reviews of its trade policies and practices, which are conducted by the World Trade Organization Secretariat and a panel of trade experts. The review process includes an in-depth examinations of each country trade policies, including its trade barrier, trade agreements, and trade related laws and regulation. The goal of this process is to identify any areas where a company's trade policies may be hindering the flow of the goods and services and to suggest a measure for reform. By establishing and directing this trade policy review mechanism, the World Trade Organization helps to promote greater transparency and accountability in international trade and to encourage its member countries to adopt more open and liberal trade policies. Ultimately, this mechanism helps to create a more level playing field for all countries and to promote more open, fair, and predictable trading. Therefore, cooperates on equal footing with the World Bank and International Monetary Fund for the purpose of economic policy making. It means that the World Trade Organizations cooperates with other international organizations such as World Bank and the International Monetary Fund to promote economic policymaking and coordination. These organizations have complementary rules in the global economic system, and by working together, they can help ensure that the economic policies are consistent and effective across different areas. 5. Undertakes research and publishes information and studies for international community. By undertaking research and publishing information and studies, the World Trade Organization helps to promote greater transparency, accountability in international trade, and to ensure that policy making is based on sound evidence and analysis. The organization research and analysis also helps to promote greater understanding of the benefits of international trade and to support efforts to ensure that the benefits of the trade are shared widely and equitable. The challenges before the World Trade Organizations. So number 1, protection level in textile and clothing and agricultural product is more than 10 times the average of other merchandise. Okay, this means that in this context of the challenges faced by the World Trade Organizations, the level of protectionism in the trade, like trade barriers such as tariffs, quotas, and subsidies for textile and clothing, or even in agricultural products, is higher than the average level of protectionism for other types of merchandise. Or in other words, the textiles and clothing and agricultural sectors are subject to much greater trade barriers and restrictions than the other sectors, which make it harder for businesses in this sector to compete on global scales. This can be a major challenge for countries and industries that rely heavily on these sectors for economic growth and development. Is in terms of market access for non-agricultural products, developed countries have employed different techniques to restrict and import such goods, including social and environmental issues. The developed countries have used various techniques to restrict the import of non-agricultural products from developing countries. One of these techniques is the use of social and environmental issues as non-tariff barriers to trade. For example, developed countries may impose standard regulations related to work rights, environmental protections, and product safety that are difficult for developing countries to meet. So these standards and regulation may be necessary and beneficial for consumers and workers, but they can also create additional cost and barriers for the businesses in developing countries. Furthermore, some developed countries may also use trade policies such as anti-dumping duties and countervailing duties to protect their domestic industries from the competitions from developing countries. So these policies can make it difficult for developing countries to compete in global markets, even if they have a comparative advantage in producing a certain goods. So as a result, developing countries may face significant challenges in accessing developed country markets for their non-agricultural products. This can limit their economic growth and development and may also contribute to the economic inequality. Number 3 is the Singapore issues are still to be solved. GATT is not effective. TRIPS goes against free trade. So this issue is about a Singapore issue. Refers to the set of trade-related issues that were discussed during the World Trade Organization's Doha rounds of negotiations, which is started in 2001. These issues includes investment, competition policy, government procurement, and trade facilitations. However, there was a significant disagreement among the World Trade Organization members on how to address these issues, and negotiations on them were eventually suspended. Regarding the general agreement on trade and services, it is a World Trade Organization agreement that aims to liberalize trade and services by reducing barriers to trade and investment in the services sector. While some argue that GATT is not effective in achieving its goal, others argue that it has facilitated significant liberalizations of trade and services, particularly in areas such as telecommunications and financial services. So regarding the trade-related aspect of intellectual property rights or TRIPS agreement, it is set standards for the protections and enforcement of intellectual property in international trade. While some critics argue that the TRIPS goes against free trade by imposing restriction on the use of intellectual property, others argue that it is necessary to protect the interest of those who create and own intellectual property. So, in summary, the Singapore issue is remain unresolved. There are differing opinions on the effectiveness of GATS and the impacts of TRIPS on free trade. So these are very complex issues that requires a careful considerations in negotiations among the World Trade Organization. Next is the representation by transition countries and less developed countries is still meager. The accession procedure at the World Trade Organization is very slow. It means that it is true that the representation by transition countries and less developed countries in the World Trade Organizations remain limited rather. Despite efforts to promote inclusivity, these countries continue to face significant challenges in participating effectively in the World Trade Organization's negotiations and decision-making processes. One of the main challenges of these countries is the slow accession procedure at the World Trade Organizations. The accession process can be a lengthy and complex one, involving negotiations on a wide range of trade-related issues, including tariffs, trade barriers, and intellectual property rights. This can create a significant barriers entry for developing countries, particularly those with limited resources and capacity. Moreover, once a country becomes a member of World Trade Organization, it may face challenges in participating fully in World Trade Organization's negotiations and decision-making processes. So developing countries may lack the resources and expertise to effectively engage in negotiations and defend their interest in the face of more powerful trading partners. Efforts are being made address these challenges, including through technical assistance and capacity building programs for developing countries. However, more needs to be done to ensure that all World Trade Organization members are able to participate fully and effectively in the in the organization's decision-making process. Challenges that facing by the World Trade Organization is the decision of dispute settlement body is not fully implemented by the developed economically stronger countries. So it is true that there have been cases where the decisions of the World Trade Dispute Settlement Body have not been fully implemented by developed or economically stronger countries. This can occur when a country is found to have violate world trade rules or agreements, and the dispute settlement body recommends that the country take measure to bring its policies compliance with the World Trade Organization's rules. However, in some cases, the country in question may fail to fully implement the recommended measures or may only partially implement them. This can create ongoing trade tensions between the countries and undermine the effectiveness of the World Trade Dispute Settlement System. One reason for this is that the World Trade Organization has limited enforcement mechanism to ensure that the countries comply with dispute settlement ruling. The organization can authorize the imposition of trade sanctions against the countries that fail to comply, but this is a relatively rare occurrence and can also have a negative consequences for the global economy. In some cases, developed or economically stronger countries may also have greater political and economic influence within the World Trade Organization, which can make it more difficult for other countries to enforce a dispute settlement rulings against them. So the overall the issue of non-compliance with the World Trade Organization's dispute settlement rulings remains a significant challenge for the organizations, and there is an ongoing debate on how to strengthen the enforcement mechanism available to the World Trade Organization.
The World Trade Organization in India. So India was a founder member of the GATT and Uruguay round discussions and is bound to abide by the resolutions taken up and incorporated in the final act. So over the years, India has been tuning its external sector policy in conformity with the WTO principles, with specific cases listed below. So number 1, India has bound around two-thirds of its tariff lines prior to WTO, with a ceiling of 25% for intermediate goods, 40% for manufactured, and 100% for the agricultural goods. Number two is the Indian government proposed to eliminate quantitative restrictions in a phased manner over 9 years, but the length of the period was not acceptable to some importing countries, so it was reduced to 6 years. Number three, India has agreed to abide by the WTO agreement on intellectual property rights, but still maintains that the Doha mandate should not be diluted to restrict the scope of disease to just infection. Number 4. India has assured establishment and administration of national standard and technical regulations in accordance with MFN principle, but has also made a conditional offer for liberal moves on the part of developed countries. Number 5. India has agreed to offer entry to foreign service providers in 33 lines of activities, including special and differential treatment during anti-dumping and countervailing duty investigations, greater transparency in regional trade agreements and fisheries subsidies, and more discussion on the substantive issues under JATT Article 24. And lastly, India has amended customs valuation rules to bring them in line with WTO provisions, strengthen anti-dumping duties, and reaffirm its commitment to the development of the poor.
So topic 6.6, United Nations Conference on Trade and Development, or the UNCTAD. Topic 6.6.1, the origin of the UNCTAD. So the UNCTAD is a significant international institution shaping international trade and development in the developing world. It was the absence of a desired remedy to the trade problems of the developing world in the hands of the GATT that led to the establishment of the UNCTAD. GATT had no doubt led to multilateral trade negotiations, but its principle of non-discrimination and reciprocity did not suit the interests of developing countries. It also failed to limit the use of non-tariff barriers imposed by developed countries on their imports from developing world under the guise of safeguard measures. This led to low-sided world trade, with the exports from the developing countries increasing only by half, and their share in the world trade falling from nearly one-third in 1950 to around one-fifth by the early 1960s. All this led to the growing trade deficit, especially at the time when they needed a large amount of foreign exchange for their economic development programs. The weak bargaining position of third world countries was highlighted by economists, leading to the formation of the Group of 77 and the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development, or the UNCTAD. The UNCTAD was set up as an organ of the General Assembly to provide developing countries with a platform to build pressure on developed countries for granting them relief in matters of trade and development.
In the topic 6.6.2, in major areas of negotiations, the negotiations and deliberations at different rounds have focused on trade and development, particularly for developing countries. So in table 6.2, we can see the rounds, the year and place, which means ang round, amo siya kung ilan natabo ang meetings. Nakabutang man dire ang year kung saan ini nga meetings natabo kag ang place kung diin ginheld ang meeting. So, basahan na sa isa. So, broadly speaking, the negotiations pinpointed at the following issues.
So the Commodity Stabilization Program, it included international commodity agreements on 10 core commodities of special interest to developing countries to regulate supply and demand for these commodities and bring stability in export proceeds. So developed countries were afraid of collective action. Next is the UNCTAD negotiated to increase market access for products from developing countries to create a second window of the Common Fund, remove duty on manufactured exports, and create the generalized system of the Generalized System of Preferences or the GSP. Next is the Finance and Debt Relief. So the UNCTAD was of the view that reform in the trading system was essential for reducing the foreign exchange component of development outlays in the developing countries. So to achieve this, 0.7% of the GNP of developed countries should come out in form of consensual assistance, out of which 0.15% should be embarked exclusively for least developed countries. So the UNCTAD's move led to the evolution of many debt relief measures such as writing off of debt, debt refinancing, and rescheduling. So in 1978, the Trade and Development Board resolved to agree to retroactive adjustment of the terms of the ODA debt of low-income developing countries, under which more than 50 such countries benefit from debt relief for debt valued over 6.5 billion US dollar. Next is the preferential treatment for the least developed countries or the LDCs. So the UNCTAD has played a key role in mobilizing international support for the LDCs, creating the Special New Program of Action or the SNPA in 1981 and an agreement in 1995 to improve the transport systems. Last is the Code of Conduct for the Linear Conferences. So the UNCTAD helped to adopt the United Nations Convention on a Code of Conduct for Linear Conferences in 1974, so which allowed developing countries to get an equal share in merchant fleets. This was followed by other conventions related to multimodal transportation, registration of ships, and maritime lines and mortgages. Topic 6.6.3 Some recent developments. So the UNCTAD is making consistent efforts to attain its objectives through its Division on Investment, Technology, and Enterprise Development, or the DITE. Since 2000, the ITE has undertaken research and policy analysis in the field of FDI, and 160 bilateral investment treaties have been concluded since then. The UNCTAD 11 at Sao Paulo, Brazil proposed to ensure coherence between national development strategies and global economic development as a means to foster sustainable trade and development. So the developed countries interpret good national governance in the framework of economic liberalization and globalization, while the developing countries stress on the cooperation to be shown by the developed world with respect to trade, debt, transfer of technology, and making investments. So the UNCTAD 12 held at Accra, Ghana, addressed the opportunities and challenges of globalization for development, calling for coherence between economic development and poverty alleviation, enhancing the enabling environment to strengthen productive capacity, and enhancing the role of the UNCTAD and its institutional effectiveness. So the Accra Accord highlighted the challenges facing many developing countries as they strive to integrate successfully into the international economic and financial system, and set out a detailed agenda for economic and social development spanning over areas ranging from commodities trade and debt to investment and new technologies.